All right, welcome everyone to the Esports Career Readiness Skills webinar. My name is Eric Peterson. I am an account executive for Trox here in Phoenix. I'm also a former teacher and school district IT technician, as well as a lifelong gamer and retro gaming podcast host. So I'm extremely excited to be sitting here talking to you today about video games, but more importantly, how they can play a role in education. Because when I was growing up, outside of developing video games, they were still just a hobby. But today they can lead to a legitimate and rewarding career. While they have become more mainstream in the public eye, esports itself is starting to gain more traction. However, it's important to understand just how big esports actually is. Globally, 495 million sports viewers watched some form of esports in 2020, which puts it well beyond the 2.48 million watching MLB and the 15.2 million watching NFL telecasts. And all those viewers translate into big, big dollars. The esports market itself is predicted to generate a revenue of upwards $1.6 billion by 2023. Now, with such a massive market hitting the scenes, there's naturally going to be a lot of interest from schools who are looking to help prepare students to fill those jobs in that industry. And in the US, about 200 colleges are starting to offer around $15 million per year in scholarships. And university teams can earn millions more in tournament prizes. So numbers like this make esports really hard to ignore and write off as just a hobby. There's a definite need to support this fast growing market. And that need includes plenty of jobs for programmers, software engineers, platform developers, marketers, data engineers, and the like. In its infancy, esports was largely just about playing video games competitively. And to a point, that's still what it is today, but it's grown so much more since then. Today, we're going to focus on how esports has evolved from a hobby into a towering industry that's competing with viewerships with the likes of the NBA, the NFL, soccer, and move on to how esports can help students build career readiness skills, and then what career opportunities are available for the students who excel in esports. So joining me today are a couple industry professionals who are going to answer some key questions for us. But if you have questions of your own, please note that there will be about 10 minutes at the end of this webinar where you'll be able to submit questions and ask our panelists whatever you would like to. If you haven't done so already, please submit those via the Zoom's Q&A feature. But before we get started, I want to take a minute to let each of the panelists introduce themselves. First up, we have Ryan Shuttlesworth from ASUS.
Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Shuttlesworth. I'm the National BDM for ASUS Computers esports brand Republic of Gamers, one of the most storied and innovative and award-winning endemic brands in the esports industry. I'm a former educator, a tech enthusiast, and an avid gamer. In my role, I act as a trainer and a facilitator for our partners and our end users. Happy to be here today.
Thanks, Ryan. Next up, we have Joshua Kell from Horizon AVL.
Hi, my name is Joshua Kell. I am the CEO of Horizon AVL and Esports Integration. We are a 40-year-old AV integration firm. We've been working with Trox for over 20 years, helping them integrate and design education spaces, everything from stadiums, arenas, auditoriums, large group instruction. Several years ago, we have developed a division dedicated to esports, taking all that audiovisual knowledge and bringing that into the space of education and esports. But what we're going to talk a little bit about today as well, what we're really excited is also career paths and opportunities. And we've sat down and developed with industry professionals, industry titans really as well, in developing career paths for students. So we're really excited to be here.
Yeah, we've got quite a bit of stuff to get through. And I think before we really dive into some of the nitty gritty of it, we need to talk a little bit about what esports itself actually is, because for gamers like ourselves, esports has been around for quite some time. And even if we haven't been directly a part of it, we've been aware of it in some fashion. However, as a mainstream source of entertainment, it's really starting to gain traction and garner more attention from people outside of the gaming world. And with that industry starting to explode, schools are naturally going to start taking an interest in wanting to get involved and help prepare their students to enter that workforce and fill all of those jobs. But I think before we can understand the benefits of the esports in schools, it's important to explore that emerging area itself. So Ryan, for those of you who may just be dipping their toes into the esports waters for the very first time, can you give us an overview of esports, and in its most general sense, what is it?
Sure. So in the most basic sense, uh, esports is organized competitive video gaming. Uh, Whether this be playing against another team or an individual playing against another individual, esports is really all about that organized competitive video game play. And this can happen at a lot of different levels, like primary schools or higher education institutions. It's not just tied to professionals and pro leagues. And it's really similar to how traditional sports operate, right? Soccer is a perfect example. Soccer extends to pretty much every age group and skill level, and it's not solely based on the English Premier League or the World Cup. But just like soccer, there's a difference between competing in a tournament and passing the ball around with your friends. And the same thing can be said in the world of esports and video games. We don't consider it esports until there's organized competitive play. Otherwise, it's just gaming.
It's just playing with your friends. But when we think of large scale sporting events, we do think of the Super Bowl, the World Series, the World Cup, and other traditional major sporting events that have been mainstays within society for decades. Uh, but I don't think a lot of people really understand just how big esports is. So, Josh, can you give us an idea of just how big the esports market really is?
Sure. Actually, the best thing I can do is probably share something, just a slide with you, and what this actually looks like from an actual competition. So this is the Dota 2 International, which is one of the largest games and from a prize purse standpoint, right? 25 million in a prize purse for the winning for the teams. And so from a scale standpoint, obviously we talked a little bit, in your introduction, Eric, about how many people are watching. We are seeing more people watch competitive video game play in esports than traditional sports, right? So League of Legends a few years ago, in their total numbers, you were over 80-90 million people turning in. When you look at some of the traditional sports that we look at, like baseball and basketball, in fact, actually combined baseball and hockey, both the NHL and the MLB combined were actually less than the League of Legends championship. But this gives sort of the grand scale of things, right? This sort of looks at, you have the competitors that are on the stage, you have the fans that are in the stadium and large spaces, you have a lot of people that are competing in that space. So that sort of gives the grand scale of everything from that perspective. There are more professional teams that are being developed, that are out there, that are continuing to recruit and to bring on more and more games. There's more software developers that are developing more games for the competitive nature. So the industry is growing, right? Day over day, year over year, month over month. I mean, we're seeing just still, even in the midst of where we are from a pandemic standpoint, we're seeing a huge growth in esports from a professional side, and then also we're seeing it at a educational scholastic side as well.
Yeah, and with the prevalence of things like YouTube and Twitch, and esports have thrived in the face of the pandemic as well, because you don't technically need to be in the same spot with it. But even for myself, with things like Twitch, you can just hop on and you can watch something on the fly. You've got it in your
Absolutely.
pocket, you've got it in your computer, you have it everywhere. There's not a prescribed schedule for all of that. So it's just there's a lot more prevalence within it. So despite its massive size, esports still has some hurdles in its way. Number one of which is the stigma surrounding video games. Traditional sports themselves have been a mainstay within education for generations, but video games have still largely been considered a hobby. I know they were when I was growing up, and it's something to be done at home outside of school hours. And if you were caught playing video games in school, you were going to get some sort of punishment for it. So, Ryan, how do you think that esports can actually be beneficial within a school setting? And then what do you think is the biggest stigma to overcome when it actually comes to having a school invest in that?
Right. So I think you have to look at You have to look at the stigma itself, right? So every time I hear this question, I think of my mom screaming at me in the background, yelling, "Hey, Rye, video games are going to rot your brain." But I mean, you also have to look at why traditional sports have been so successful and influential in communities and institutions. And when you boil it down, you see a few centralized themes surrounding these programs. For scholar athletes, it's learning how to work for a greater purpose, learning teamwork, understanding how to lead or interact with others, and how to prioritize. Really, they're learning those soft skills that we as individuals need to have to interact with each other throughout our lives. And for the community surrounding them, it gives us something to rally behind, right? Something that we can take pride in and use to validate not only our work as influencers of the students, but I think for a lot of us as parents or guardians or mentors of these scholar athletes, because we understand what success looks like in traditional sports, we can validate if our students are growing and maturing and if they're being successful. But that's not really the case with esports, and that's really where the stigma lies. Anecdotally, I when I tell somebody that I work in esports for my career, and I'm sure you guys can probably echo this sentiment as well, the typical response I get is, "So you play video games for your job?" And for somebody like me, I'm only successful in the industry because I had people who let me explore those interests in coding and gaming. They use those interests for me to further my want for education. And they may not have understood their future impact on my life, but certainly in hindsight, I recognize their work. And when we as influencers of students, when we take a step back and we look at something like esports that our students are highly engaged in, and when we use esports like a learning tool and a funnel to bring our students into a higher level of learning, just like we use traditional activities, we'll see the positive outcomes. We'll see those positive outcomes just like we see in other after school programs or other traditional sports, like having a higher GPA or having better SAT scores, better attendance rate, or lower dropout rates, because our students are engaged in something that interests them. And when you look at it from this perspective, it's a lot easier to justify time and resources and money spent.
Well, that's one of the keys of education is fostering an interest within a student in order to find something that is going to push them to succeed. And for the longest time, traditional sports were that, but now more and more kids are getting involved in video games, even if they're not playing it, they're watching it. And it's what they are truly interested in. But kind of a follow up to that is a lot of times when you say the word video games to a lot of people, they immediately turn off. They just don't want to hear about it because maybe they're so far removed from it, or they don't have an understanding of it, or it's just not in their wheelhouse of knowledge. How can you help change that perception with some of those key decision makers?
Well, I mean, it's education, right? It's going to have to be sort of preaching through the element of education. We need to educate educators. We need to educate parents. What does this industry look like? Sure, it's through the lens of video games, but we sort of give this example quite often when you look at the industry of football and traditional sports, even from that perspective, you have you have an industry that's well recognized and well accepted, right? But if you go back to the late 1800s, and I sort of gave this example in yesterday's webinar, but it's such a good example. Mom and dad sent you in probably Harvard and Yale and Princeton, these universities that have been around for a long time, and football was just a bunch of guys wrestling in the mud and getting together and having fun, right? No way did they think that it was going to be a billion-dollar industry as it is today. It took time and effort and education, and it took all of those elements to really break down. Probably at that time back then, mom and dad is like, you better not get involved in this football thing, stay on your studies and focus on that. But it needs to also be brought in that there's a massive industry and it's a vessel, right? Esports and video games is a vessel in order for students to advance that career, for them to see the next to see them through a positive track of selecting the industry they want to be in. And so that's how we normally position it. Normally, when I talk to schools very specifically, if I go to I do this a lot. I go to a lot of board of education meetings, and when they're deciding on bringing esports in, and this question does come up quite often. What does this look like? And I say, don't look at it as the button in the controller, because that's what your mind runs to. You need to look at it as a vessel that will then, it's grabbing the attention of a student and an individual that that may or may not be like super involved in things. That's the other thing. It reaches a lot of diversity from that standpoint, and it meets students where they're at, and then it brings them through the element of learning a skill set, and it's just a vessel at the end of the day. So that's normally how we approach it from our perspective.
So it seems kind of like educating them on it's more than just playing a video game. It's showing them these are all of the skills that we're going to learn, and being able to break that down for them. One of the more recent technology pushes within education was actually the STEAM and STEM initiative, which has taken quite a bit of time to gain a lot of traction, but it was a little bit of a grassroots movement as well, starting off with teachers and individual educators buying stuff and working through it with their students on their own. And then the school is starting to see, oh, this is big. And now you see STEM labs popping up. I get the impression that esports is kind of the same way. You have a particular teacher who starts a club, and then that takes off, and the school sees, here's how much interest we have. Okay, now this is a very serious thing. So esports has definitely taken the mantle as the new up and comer. And there's definitely a correlation between the two. So Josh, can you talk to the correlation between STEAM and STEM as opposed to esports, and what you're seeing as a link between those two fields?
Yeah, so that is actually one of the so STEAM and STEM sort of was our beginning working with educators over a year ago, right? We work with a great group of guys at Media Transformers and they're educators, right? They're teachers, and so we sat down for a year. Over a year to develop a curriculum that met, national CTE core standards and STEM and STEAM. And when we started diving into it and we started looking at, current STEM and STEAM programs that exist, and really, once again, where esports is sort of lying, we almost saw a correlation. And yes, I agree. It took a while for that STEM initiative to really get moving, and giving students an opportunity in engineering and mathematics and science and technology, right? So all of these elements started coming together, but it was really for me, it was actually something very personal that kind of started that process of this correlation. So, I'm a parent of two. I have a son, he's 11 now, and I have a daughter, and she's 8. But 2 years ago, my son and I decided to do a project. Well, he actually didn't decide on. Dad decided to do it. And so actually, I'm going to show this slide, because this is really something that just sort of started the whole thing. So this is an arcade console. And so my son at 9 said, "Dad, can you bring home your Nintendo?" And yes, I do have my original Nintendo. And can we play it? And I said, "We're going to do something better." So for a whole summer, this is what we did. I went to my CAD engineer and I got CAD drawings, and I got it to scale with CAD information. I went to the hardware store, got all of the hardware necessary. I got a Raspberry Pi. I picked out traditional arcade buttons. And we for a whole summer built an arcade console. I showed him how to take scale off of a architectural drawing, so 1 inch, 1 foot, and he had to figure out the scale. I showed him how to use all the table saws. He did all the nailing, the wood glue and screwing on it. Dad did the jigsaw cuts, but everything else that you see there, he had done. I showed him how to stain, how to use with the wood grain. And then, this is actually him playing. And it's actually one of my favorite games, which is Zelda Link to the Past. And so he learned also with the arcade buttons how to solder. I had to show him how to build a breadboard. I showed him how to code the Raspberry Pi because we had to put if-else statements in there, right? And so this was the project that put it all together for the direction of how CTE and STEM and curriculum need to work together, because this was captivating my son. This brought him to a different level and understanding of an industry, and he was learning skills along the way. And so I sat down with educators and I said, this is what we need to do. This is how esports is going to bring students into a career and into a direction.
Well, it kind of is really pertinent to sort of what we talked about yesterday, was starting with your why or your what, and almost looking at where you want to end up and figuring out how you get there, instead of starting and saying, oh, well, I guess we're going in this direction, so this is where we need to go.
Mhm.
It's extremely powerful with that. So kind of a follow-up with that is that STEAM and STEM relies heavily on preparing students for real-world success in the variety of fields. But how does that expand into college and career opportunities? You did touch a little bit on that, but could you go a little bit further into the college aspect of that directly, and then further on into careers?
Sure. So at a collegiate level, presently, we work with over 120 colleges and universities across the U.S. landscape, right? We are helping them develop what the career paths are, the majors, the minors, the scholarship opportunities, right? There's the competitive video game play, right? And we still have that. That's still very much part of it. But everything else that supports the industry is massive, right? You have the content creation of it. You have the software developers. You have the graphic design. You have the business or the law or the economics, public relations. So all of these elements, and we could keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. At a collegiate level, majors and minors are in the esports and the gaming world are on the rise. They are on the rise, and there are a lot of great colleges and universities out there that do have some very well developed programs, but there are a lot that are still exploring and they're still going through it. But the one thing that we're hearing from these universities and these colleges is, well, now that we have this program, where do we pull this? Where do we pull these students from? What students have programs like this at a high school level or even a middle school level? What is the progression? How is that happening? And so that is where, we need to definitely start working at the K-12 side of developing a proper path, right? There's a lot of scholarships that are out there from the competitive side, in the millions from a scholarship standpoint. So there's a lot of opportunity for preparing students for a career path and that collegiate model, and to go into a college that has a lot of these robust programs.
Yeah, so it seems like as we're growing and getting further into this, there's a ton of job opportunities that are showing up, and realistically, we're preparing students for jobs that may not even exist yet. So it's just
Yeah.
getting in that cross section of skills. Ryan, ASUS is a huge supporter of esports through its Republic of Gamers and its tough sub brands. What types of skills are you and people at ASUS seeing emerging and being honed from students who get involved in esports, and why is that important?
Yeah, so Josh actually really touched on this really, really well, and not only um, with his talking points on collegiate education, but you can see this through everything that he taught his son in building that arcade system. Just Josh, perfect example. You did an awesome job. Kudos, Dad of the Year award. I wish I had done that with my son. Um, but I mean, really, when you look at esports and you look at what students are learning in education, I mean, you can look at it as a twofold or a mix of hard and soft skills. And occupationally, or the hard skills that you're going to learn, I think a lot of our students really focus a lot of their time on things like infrastructure, IT management, coding, and we see a ton of interest in broadcasting, getting your face out there, managing a social media platform, and we see whether students know it or not, a lot of students take a huge interest in marketing, and certainly you can want to be good at these things innately, but realistically you're gonna have to put the work in, and you're gonna have to
Mhm.
put the time in to build these skills. And really where esports goes is it puts students in an engagement that they can start learning these skills and working on things that they have an interest in because they're interested in the projects that they're doing. And then from there, they'll start to get the practice on those hard skills, those occupational skills that are going to help them get a foot in the door for whether it be a collegiate application or a future job. And then on the other side of it, um, they're going to learn those soft skills just like they would learn in any other academic or athletic organization. And when you look at it as a future proof concept, and if you believe a study that LinkedIn published in 2018, it said that 57% of employers valued soft skills over hard skills. Certainly you can teach somebody those hard skills, but you can't teach somebody to be a good teammate. You can't teach somebody to be a good leader. You can't teach somebody to prioritize and collaborate in a way that's going to suit the business. And I think when you look at it from both of those worldviews, um, you're going to get a really good understanding on how students can grow and how they can be successful in the future.
Yeah, and right now we have students starting at point A and wanting to get to point B. Point A is where they're at, and B is, hey, I want to be working in esports. So how do we get from one to the other? So getting them involved in esports and through institutions to fill those jobs, universities are starting to look at that and say,
Mhm.
okay, how can we attract these students? Let's start offering degrees. And at first glance, someone might get the false impression that means you just get a degree in how to play video games, which, let's face it, that'd be awesome, but that's completely not the case. For some lucky few kids, that might actually be the case if they're good enough to be able to compete at those collegiate levels. It isn't really an accurate representation of the wide range of degrees available in that major. So Josh, are you able to give us an idea of what exactly those esports degrees entail?
Sure. So, the degrees themselves are teaching general understanding of industry, right? It isn't necessarily focused on the element of esports competition playing. It is everything surrounding around the industry itself. I'll use football since we're in football season. So the industry of football, obviously the first thing we see is the players, right? That is the first thing. But everything that's behind it, right? From even the hospitality and the food service, right, to the to the sports medicine, the medical side, even the content, right? The marketing rights and all of that's massive industry that's behind the football industry. And esports is the same way. So from a degree standpoint, normally these degrees are teaching industry foundational fundamentals, right? The fundamentals of an industry that can be actually crossed across multiple industries, right? So a great example is there was a young lady at UCI, University of California, Irvine, and UCI has a great program from an esports perspective, and they're one of the leaders and pioneers that have been around doing it. And she was doing all of their streaming content. She was part of that. She was very involved in it. She understood analytics. She understood the marketing of it. And coming out of UCI, you would think that someone was involved in that she would like move over to like a professional team, like Team Envy or Team Liquid or something like that, right? The professional sports teams from the esports perspective. No, she actually got a job at Netflix. Now, Netflix has nothing to do with esports other than the fact that they have a couple of documentaries on esports, which I highly recommend if you have Netflix to type in the word esports and watch some of that content. It's really eye-opening. But she was hired by Netflix because of her understanding of streaming and categorizing and understanding the analytical data that happens in the streaming world. And so that is just an example of, once again, esports vessel, esports program, big program, but then didn't go into necessarily the esports world, but then had a very successful opportunity to go to Netflix and had a successful career at UCI, to then launch her into a full-time career at Netflix. So normally these esports degrees are covering everything from broadcast, content creation. They're covering social media, and once again, those skills are transferable. And that's how we view it as well, even at the K-12 side, is that these skills that are being learned by the students, they're transferable.
I think that's an extremely important word to help understand is transferable too, because yeah, you're keeping them engaged and in school with something that they enjoy, and that's going to keep
Mm-hmm.
them there. They're going to succeed, and then as they move on, oh hey, we have these skills because I was participating in something that I really enjoyed. So let's turn to post graduation. They get their degree in esports, and as much we've discussed it, as much as we would like it to be true, it's not just about actually playing video games. And with many industries, and especially the entertainment world, there's far more that goes on behind the scenes. um, Ryan, from your perspective, what are some of the career opportunities that are being offered to those who excel in esports? I know Josh just gave us an example of the lady that went over to Netflix, but what are you seeing on your end for people who excel in esports?
Yeah, so NASIF, the North America Scholastic Esports Federation, they just retweeted a really good graph a few days ago. And Eric, I know I sent this to you
Yeah.
really late one night. So this was done by Nico Bessoms, a sociology professor at the University of Paris, and you can find him at Nico Bessoms on Twitter. But his anecdote, I've heard him describe this a couple of times. His anecdote in explaining his reasoning for making this chart was that his students kept telling him that they wanted to have a career in esports, and he stoically would always respond, well, what do you want to do? But never really received any answers. So he and a few of his friends started making the graph, and really what he did was he outlined 10 main career paths, including, not limited to, things like communications, performance optimization, administration and sales. And he goes on further to describe 30 different job fields for those careers, and concludes by listing 80 different about 80 different roles within those fields. And I think it's pretty safe to say that if you've got enough wherewithal and dedication in esports, just like Josh's example, you may not necessarily land in the esports industry, but you're going to find something in the tech industry, or you're going to find something that's part of the interest that you have within your career path. And whether that be analytics, whether that be marketing, whether that be broadcasting, um, those hard skills that you're going to learn are going to help you get a foot in the door. And if you've got a good mentor, you're certainly going to develop the soft skills that you need in order to make yourself an attractive employee, or an attractive recruit for future business.
Yeah, Josh, a little bit ago, you mentioned something about the curriculum that you guys had developed. Can you tell us a little bit about the courseware that esports integration has been developing, and why is that important?
Sure. At a collegiate level, we help colleges, universities sort of navigate through the industry, and we have developed a sort of a process, and I think to Ryan's point that there are a lot of careers that are out there, and that breakdown of what that looks like. We've actually been developing a slide deck that, let me see if I could pull this up here. So we've generalized some overview of what this looks like. And I think this is sort of what you're talking about, Ryan. You have these high level watermarks of marketing, social media, information technology. But then when you get into that, then it gets deeper, right? Just to give the example, in sales and marketing, you have a product, you have advertising, you have licensing, you have brand manager, so these are the elements that sort of we start identifying a little bit deeper into each one of these, and obviously we can keep going and going. But from a perspective of what we're doing in the curriculum side of things, we at a K-12 level, we wanted to identify the path for students to have a successful career in something that they like. So what we've done is it is a full 4-year curriculum that meets national CTE core standards, right? So once again, developed by educators. And year one is sort of the introduction to the industry, right? And what that looks like. Everything from coding to IT to the esports industry to gaming to broadcast to social media marketing, right? That's year one. So as a freshman in high school, you're coming into this program that every marking period you're touching on something different. And then what we've done is we've then have taken it and we've sort of like a spider web have then given these academy tracks that exist. So a student may want to go down the coding path and really enjoy software development coding. So you take coding 1 and 2 and then software development. And then by your senior year, you're working on a project and you're building that project. And that's really important within our curriculum as well, is because in all of the disciplines, whether you're marketing or broadcast or coding or public relations, business, and in your senior year, you are then collaborating together with across all the disciplines, as a traditional company would do, right? Here at Horizon and Esports Integration, I have a marketing department, an engineering department. We have a sales team. And so these departments all work together on the projects. And so it is teaching those skill sets that we feel is very necessary. But it's also walking them through and sort of opening up their eyes to the industry. It was interesting. We sat down with a school recently, a high school, and we sat down with the Board of Ed and the curriculum team. And, they gave an example of, when you get to college, you say, well, what's your major? Well, my major is business. Well, what in business? What are you doing in business? Well, what do you mean? It's business. It's a business degree. Well, you're doing accounting or you're just doing business law. There's a difference. They're both business at the end of the day. And the student really hasn't been exposed to all of this. They haven't been exposed to an industry. And so in the curriculum that we've developed, it is, like I said, a 4-year curriculum. And it's a true 4-year curriculum. And it breaks down each one of those elements. I'll quickly just show this slide. This is sort of the introduction of how it breaks down. And so you've got sort of like film, broadcast, and you've got social media marketing. This is actually expanded, but this is year 1, right? And sort of how this walks through. And then from there, then they walk through each year over year. Now, the one thing that we've done is within the curriculum, we've actually designed and developed everything for the instructor and for the teacher. So you don't have to sit there and develop all this. You don't have to correlate all of the core standards. We also give to all of our instructors a pacing guide as well. So the pacing guide has, here's the big idea elements, right, for that marking period. And it can be broken up in marking period or semester or trimester. It just shifts a little bit. But then here are the national CTE core standards that particular course, that marking period are meeting. Here's the content that you're going to be delivering to the student. Here are the skills for the students of what they're going to be offering. And then we have all the assessments as well. And then on top of that, we have the platform online, which allows for the teacher to also receive professional development on content continuously. So if there's something like Twitch, and I don't know about Twitch, and what the heck is Twitch, and I'm teaching on Twitch, we actually break it down for you. What is Twitch? How to utilize Twitch? How to teach on Twitch? So that is how we're really developing the curriculum side. And our team over at Media Transformers have done an outstanding job doing this process.
So we've covered a ton of information. I'm sure we could sit here for hours and just continually dive deeper and deeper. But at this time, I want to open it up to some questions from the audience. So if you have any questions and have not already done so, please submit them via the Q&A feature. So we do have a couple that have rolled in here first. So if we already have a program, how do we find more information on courseware available and how it's being used?
I would say reach out to your Trox rep, right? So your account executive rep, because that is a good place to start, right? As far as them bringing in, like Ryan from the manufacturing side and his expertise of working in the space and being in the space, ourselves from a curriculum side and helping develop spaces and a program, that is always a good place to start. The one major thing I would sort of say is the internet can be sort of untamed at times, to say the least.
Yeah.
And esports is definitely, we hear this a lot, is the Wild West. And so the process in which I think Trox is developing is here's a solution, one solution, all your questions should be answered. I mean, you could definitely go on to some of these resources from manufacturers or even some of the leagues, but that even starts to get like there's a lot of information to vet through, and we can sort of navigate and help navigate through the waters from that perspective.
Next question. How would we start to build an esports program at our school? And that's kind of a vague question, and we did touch on it quite a bit yesterday, but if we can maybe, consolidate some of that information. We had some really good points on it yesterday.
Yeah, so the first thing you really need to do is ask yourself the whys on it. And Eric, like you said, we touched base on this really well yesterday, but the first thing you need to understand is why you want to do the program, whether that be for curriculum reasons, whether that be for CTE or teaching your students how to make hard skills for their roles, or whether that be that you want to retain or that you want to attract a community for your classroom within your school. And we've seen it. We've we've seen the NFHS make a couple of studies on this, but their most prominent one really just went out to say that almost 80% of our students weren't engaging in after school activities or weren't engaging in sports. Now, whether or not you believe their statistics is beyond that, but when you go out and want to actively engage students that you haven't previously activated or engaged with in a manner that they want to be a part of, you're going to have a lot of success. But the first thing you really need to do is take a step back and ask yourself why you want to do that. And then once you have that answer, then start making the goals, start making the platform, and start laddering it out. So that way you have obtainable and objective goals that you and your students can reach.
So kind of piggybacking off of that is our next question of how many students do we need to start a program?
Well, I think that depends. Eric, Ryan, you want to answer that?
Um,
So
yeah, sure. Yeah, you can.
Go for it.
To start a program, I mean, really, you only need two students, right? So the main concept of esports is competitive video game play, and you need to have some kind of competition. I mean, technically, you could run it with one and have that student competing against other schools and doing everything within the sun, but we see a lot of schools start out with games like Rocket League. Rocket League, perfect example. In most cases, most of our schools are playing on a 3-on-3 basis. So those three students that they have will play against another team that's three students, and then they'll have a mentor, a facilitator, or a teacher, somebody that's going to step in and be a coach for those students, help them out with strategy, help them out with the soft skills that they should be learning on a regular basis. But really, I would tell you bare minimum two. From there, they're going to help each other grow in their own capability and their own soft skills. They're going to learn the hard skills that they need to do to make their program to grow and build onto it. And then the more students you can get from there, the better. I think in a lot of games, Hearthstone is only one player. That's 1-on-1. Rocket League, you can play 1-on-1, but again, we see it in most cases 3-on-3. Games like Overwatch, you're 6-on-6. So the more students you have, the better, but definitely you can start with only a handful.
You did mention just a couple of games here, and one of the questions that I get from a lot of my customers when I'm having this discussion is video games are violent. And a large majority of those competitive ones, you have your Call of Duty Warzones, your Overwatch, even League of Legends to some degree, some of the most popular ones are violent. So naturally, that's going to be a roadblock to getting those into schools. How do you address that? And what do you see schools doing to either get around that or avoid that?
I think it varies from school to school and their tolerance of what that looks like. And we've seen that, right? So normally we preface it that way. We say, listen, there are games like Rocket League and Smash Brothers, or Super Smash, or even some of the console-based games, NBA 2K or Madden or something of that nature, right? There are those games that exist out there that don't necessarily are a Call of Duty from that perspective. It just comes down to how we normally position it is, what are you accepting, and you tell us what that looks like from your world, and then there's most likely a game for you for that, so we can make it happen. It's not necessarily the content within the game, it's everything surrounding the game that's necessary, right? That you have to develop the strategy and building a team, and like look at it from that perspective too as well.
So kind of piggybacking off that as well, if you pick Rocket League, that doesn't have to be your school's only game that you compete in. You can have an esports program with multiple teams, because if one student is really good at Overwatch, they might not be really good at Rocket League. So you can pull more students in with different games, correct?
Yeah, track and field. Look at it like that, right? Swimming.
Perfect.
Track and field is the overall. Esports is the overall. Like you have shot put, long jump. You don't want your shot put person to be doing a sprint because they're not built the same, right? So the mechanics in Overwatch and Rocket League are completely different. So that's normally how we try to make a connection into the traditional sport model.
Perfect. Well, I think that's it for all of our questions. If you do have any additional questions, please submit them. And when we send out the follow-up email, we'll have all of those questions answered for you. I want to thank each of our panelists for their participation, not only today, but yesterday as well. And for everyone who attended today's webinar. If you would like any more information about what we talked about today, please visit the Trox resource page, which is going to be shared in the chat. Guys, thanks again. This has been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate all of your insight, and hopefully everyone who attended learned something new. But last question for each of you before we head off. If you had to give one thing for our viewers to take away from today, what would it be?
One thing, I'm gonna probably have to fall back on what we were talking about yesterday, and that is definitely esports and the industry, the massive industry, preparing for the industry, preparing students for the industry. For me, that's still my heart. That's our mission, is preparing a new generation of individuals and students for a very exciting industry.
Because esports is here to stay. It's
here
not
to
going
stay.
anywhere, and it is much bigger than a lot of people really understand.
Yeah.
Ryan, how about you?
Yeah, so I would say esports isn't just about the video games. I mean, absolutely, it's about organized video game play, but there's so much more. And just like we've had a discussion today, and in all of the different career fields and opportunities, all of the different hard skills that your students are going to learn, you're going to find students that want to be a part of your program, and they don't want to play the video games. They just want to be that team manager, or they want to be that person on the sideline that roots everybody on. It's more than just the video games. And when you look at it in Grandview in that perspective, you're only going to be successful.
Yeah, it's creating that space where students feel safe and comfortable and understood. So, guys, thanks again. Really appreciate it. Everybody, thank you very much for attending today.